Okay, hello everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our session. We're very fortunate to have Robert presenting again for us. Robert is one of our new trainers at the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy, South Africa. Um, and what is wonderful about Robert's presentations, I don't know if any of you were, some of you were present at the first one he did, is that Robert takes an unusual approach to interpretation of logotherapy. But what is so wonderful about it is that he makes it beautifully accessible and relatable to us. And of course, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to spread the word of logotherapy and certainly make it more popular here in South Africa. And one of the ways of doing that is making people realize how relatable it is and how applicable it is to life in the 21st century. And Robert's very particular approach to storytelling and his understanding of metaphor and symbolism always makes his presentations very exciting, relatable, listenable, and entertaining. So, Robert, thanks again. Very privileged to have you presenting again for us. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for that introduction. I just quickly want to share the screen. Okay, I think you should all be able to see the presentation in presentation mode. I am also going to open up my Word document on the screen, so I'm not going to be able to see everyone on the screen on the video call itself, but I will be here, and I think you will be able to see me. The presentation is just with a few key points, some pictures in it, so it's not too crucial to follow along on the presentation itself. And just before I start with the presentation, I should probably note that this theme that I'm addressing using things like Doctor Strange, Marvel, popular culture is actually part of a larger research project I am also busy with at my Department of New Testament, where I see how these type of themes, these popular cultural elements, manifest throughout the world and is influenced by different areas. So, in a sense, this also links up to other research that I am busy with at this stage. And yeah, you will hear it is interesting. It was a very dear topic for me. I went through it a few times trying to shorten it. It's about just under 40 minutes, about 36 minutes that I got it down to. But I hope you enjoyed. Immensely enjoyed the preparation for this. So, with no more ado or anything else, let's then jump in. Now, before we delve into the strange world of Doctor Strange and explore the mystic arts that it shows us, I'd like to set the scene for us by outlining a few key points for this presentation. In the cinematic world of Doctor Strange, there are multiple dimensions, and in later installments of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, there are multiple universes. But regardless in which universe you go, in each of them, Doctor Strange and other sorcerers have access to a so-called mirror dimension. It is a place where they can practice their mystic arts, grow in their abilities, and even in certain instances contain dangers without affecting the real world. In other words, in this world you can practice dangerous ideas without affecting the real world. I proceed from the assumption that this space where we are gathered tonight is not only a safe space, but also something like the mirror dimension. Initially, some of the ideas I will propose to think about and think through might sound strange, dangerous, and for those who know me, it will even sound sometimes a bit blasphemous. I want to assure all who listen tonight, as well as those after this recording, I am committed to a certain faith tradition. I live a life of meaning and I embrace each moment with conviction, responsibility, and accountability. And it is because of this stance that I take to life that I cannot do anything else than present what I have to present tonight. As with some of my favorite novels, science fiction, utopian, and dystopian works, this presentation comes with a sort of a disclaimer at the beginning. What is expressed herein may or may not reflect the stance of the author. I am not trying to convince anyone to think as I do or even to accept what I present here as some type of dogmatic statements. This is, as an extensive thought experiment, a journey into a mirror dimension where we can speak freely and ponder something much more intricate and complex than just the mystic arts found in the multiverse. We are going to ponder the meaning of life tonight. To achieve this, my presentation will be divided into four distinct parts, culminating in a conclusion where I try to synthesize all of these parts into a whole. In the first, I will give a very quick summary of some of the tenets of logotherapy. What are the foundations, the things that logotherapy say we need and use to find meaning in life? I do this for two reasons as my first departing point. First, I do it for myself. One of the questions we all often are asked when people hear we are busy with logotherapy is, what is this type of therapy? To say it is a school of existential psychology where meaning is found in suffering is a wonderful answer for a book, but not when it is a networking event, except if it is a network event between psychologists and philosophers. Few people will understand what existentialism really means in the end. Not that most psychologists and philosophers fare any better in this respect. In the first part, I want to present a very brief but grounded discussion on some of these foundations. The second reason I start with these foundational principles is that they will always be in the back of my mind and were in the back of my mind as I viewed Doctor Strange and thought about what I am presenting here tonight. For the second part, I will venture not into the world of Doctor Strange, but rather present a very quick overview of the history of the cosmos. The aim here is not cosmological or astronomical, but rather to give us some perspective on time and space. The question I want to address here is the following. Is Doctor Strange correct when referring to humanity, even someone as important as the Ancient One in the film, as a momentary speck in an indifferent universe? For the third and fourth section, I will turn to the film Doctor Strange as well as a short series episode, What If, related to Doctor Strange. In this part, I propose that while Doctor Strange in the film transforms from a bad existentialist who lives an ontic and inauthentic life to a well-rounded existentialist grounded in an authentic and ontological life, the Doctor Strange in the What If episode never makes this transformation. At the same time, it is a heartbreaking moment to see the What If episode. It also enlightens us and might even help us understand how the different tenets of logotherapy are intertwined and are all needed for a meaningful existence. So, with no further ado, let's jump into what this thing is we call logotherapy. As noted, logotherapy is an existential psychological approach to finding meaning in life and, more specifically, to finding meaning in situations of suffering. The credentials of this therapeutic approach have their origins not in qualitative or quantitative research projects. No variables, correlations, or causations were determined to give validity to logotherapy. Rather, as is known to many of us, logotherapy was born in some of the most inhumane and harsh conditions imaginable. It was in conditions where ideology became more important than human life, where human beings were forced to live each moment literally as if it were their last. With the point of a finger, it could be decided who lives and who dies. In these circumstances of the concentration camps of the Second World War, Viktor Frankl developed and fleshed out his logotherapy. The first layer I want to highlight is the three principles of logotherapy: freedom of will, the will to meaning, and the meaning of life. The freedom of will highlights the responsibility of each person to the call of life, something that we will see is immensely important in the narrative of Doctor Strange. It is this freedom of will, the freedom to choose how you respond to life, that can bring about meaning in some of the most harsh situations. For me, this has become one of the foundational values in my own life, knowing that I can respond to each situation and that I am not at the mercy of situations or even emotions. No matter how bad things might get, no matter what happens in life, I always can choose how I respond. This freedom of will, the willingness to choose and take responsibility, is stated differently in Jordan Peter's book 12 Rules. The first of these is to stand up tall. In short, this rule explains how lobsters compete for the best spot to burrow in and mate among one another. These competitions between the lobsters can be quite fierce, but the interesting thing is what happens when one of the lobsters loses this competition. When one loses the display of dominance, their brain literally gets rewired or regrown in certain cases. The losing lobster's brain chemistry changes and they sulk around. A sulking lobster struggles to get back to the top, if it ever does. Lobsters react instinctually, but we are not lobsters. We can choose how to react to our situation. Suffering in itself has no meaning. Saying that we can find meaning and choose meaning in suffering never negates the atrocity and the need to alleviate suffering. But again, we are not lobsters. We can choose how we take a stand amidst hardship. And an important distinction in this regard is the realization that suffering might not always be our fault, but we always have the responsibility in how we respond to our suffering. This striving and searching for meaning directly leads to the second tenet, the will to meaning. Humans are meaning seeking animals. We want to make sense of the world. We want things to fit together to form a coherent and harmonious picture. We can see this throughout the history of humanity. Some of the most tragic events, which are times of deep suffering, gain meaning when they are perceived as forming part of a harmonious whole narrative. In this sense, the present is the point from which we make sense of the past. The meaning of the past of past occurrences changes depending on how we perceive them from the present moment. We do not exist in the past nor in the future. We only exist in the present. And it is in the present that we find meaning, where we attribute meaning to the past and act in such a way that the future might also have meaning for us. Thus, the search for meaning, our will to find meaning, can only occur in the present, where you take an active, responsible role in creating that meaning. The third tenet highlights this thing we call meaning, namely that no matter where you are from, who you are, what your status, gender, or place in society is, every person's life has meaning. No one and nothing can destroy the meaning of life. It is important to realize that each person has a unique meaning that only they can answer to and understand. As Frankel notes, with some inclusive changes of my own to the quotation, life does not mean something vague, but something very real and concrete, just as life's tasks are also very real and concrete. They form a human's destiny, which is different and unique from each individual. No human and no destiny can be compared with any other human or any other destiny. No situation repeats itself, and each situation calls for a different response. This uniqueness and singleness, which distinguishes each individual and gives a meaning to their existence, has a bearing on creative work as much as it does on human love. These tenets are wonderful and provide a good starting point, but for many they might seem abstract and far removed from daily life. How do we give concrete expression to to this constant search for meaning? What does it look like to choose a life of responsibility where we can create a harmonious picture of a life worth living? And what shape can this thing called the meaning of life take? These are answered through the avenues by which humans can create meaning, of which Frankl identifies three: creative, experiential, and attitudinal values. The key to these three is the second word, namely values, that determines your actions and how you perceive reality, and note the plural in this instance. As we said, each person's interpretation of the question they are answering is uniquely their own, and this has to be respected. Similarly, what one person finds creative might not be what another does, but this does not mean and imply that one's creative choices are superior to another's. It only means it only means that these values might differ from one another. So, what are these values meant by, and what do they represent in short? Creative values provide meaning through the creativity that one puts out into the world. This can be the work you do, the hobbies you practice, or community engagement. Even when this is a solitary action like writing a book or doing research, the creative process and what is produced therein is an answer to the call of life. It is that unique task that you feel you are called to do. For me, it's about using popular culture phenomenon to ponder life, the universe, and everything that comes with it. This is certainly not the only way to highlight the meaning of life. It is certainly not the only endeavor that gives life meaning. But for me, it is a creative value I feel called to. The experiential values are what we experience on a daily basis, things that provide each moment with meaning. A sunrise, the sound of our Dida calling, laying awake at night listening to the crickets, things that you experience as meaningful by seeing, by sensing them through sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Stated differently, it is realizing that you are connected to the rest of creation in a meaningful way, that sensing creation and feeling connected to it can be meaningful. This will be important when we move on to Doctor Strange later on. Attitudinal values brings us full circle back to where we started, with the freedom to choose your attitude towards any situation. That you have a responsibility to respond to any situation, and that this response can only be determined by yourself. This one is probably the hardest to define concretely, but let us try. That is, in the end, all that we as earthbound creatures can do. We try our best and hope that the rest follows. When we think of life, people usually think that life happens to them, that it is something external, that they have no control over it. If you assume that you are a puppet and somewhere out there is a puppet master drawing your strings, and you have no control over this life you live, why continue with it then? The game is just simply no longer worth it then. Usually, this is when people start to feel all the bad things that happen to them are their fault. They did something to upset the universe, and now they are paying the price for it. Now, there are certain moments in life, which we all know about, that we make stupid decisions, and these lead to situations that is, in a sense, our fault that we land in. But even then, how you respond and take responsibility for those moments are in your control. For the majority of times, when bad things happen, sickness, death, depression, loss of a job, are moments that are not our fault. Again, I know there are different variants to this, but life does not simply happen to us. We can choose how we respond and our attitudes towards a situation, which can change how we perceive it. Now, considering what we said, it might sound like we are quite sophisticated and important beings in this creation. Could it be then that Doctor Strange was incorrect, that we are more than momentary specks in an indifferent universe? To answer this, I want us to take a trip through time and space. How wonderful and grand are we as humans on the scale of universal history, the history of the cosmos, and the size of the cosmos in which we find ourselves? A detailed account of the universe's origin, fascinating as it might be, is unnecessary here. Instead, I want to highlight two aspects. Where do we as humans fit within the cosmic history in time and space? For much of human history, we believe that the earth and humanity held a very special certain place in creation. This was shaped by a very certain reading and understanding of the creation narrative found in the Christian Bible or the Judean scriptures of Genesis, which depicts humanity as the crown of creation, the climax of a divine masterpiece. In a sense, we thought that we are the rabbit being pulled from a magic hat. This idea found scientific expression in the so-called geocentric model, placing Earth at the center of the universe. Over time, however, this view could not be upheld. Neither spatially nor temporally does it hold true. We know better at this point. Even within our solar system, Earth is a mere speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The assumption that all this was made for us is increasingly a fragile view to hold. Yet, the very fact that we exist is extraordinary. Cosmologists trace the universe's origin to about 13.8 to 14.5 billion years, give or take a few billion years, when all matter and energy were compressed into an extremely hot, dense state, often described metaphorically as a primordial atom. In an instant, this state expanded, the Big Bang. From that event emerged subatomic particles such as quarks and leptons, the building blocks of atoms. Hydrogen and helium formed first. Hydrogen clouds later condensed under gravity to form the stars, including those that populate our Milky Way galaxy, home to hundreds and billions of stars. At this early stage, planets did not yet exist. Planet formation is both a beautiful and violent process. Within stars, nuclear fusion converts hydrogen into helium and heavier elements. When massive stars exhaust their fuel, they collapse and may explode as supernovae, dispersing their elements into space. From this cosmic debris, new stars and planets, such as our Sun and Earth, eventually formed. So next time when you hear the nursery rhyme, Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Now we know it's hydrogen, helium, and all the other elements that has formed. The familiar classroom model of our solar system is vastly misleading to us. Again, we see where Earth is situated, and it seems like a well-ordered system. Close, when you move outside the Earth, you can view the rest of the planets. But if Earth was reduced to 3 millimeters in diameter, the Sun would measure to 327 millimeters across. On this scale of ours, Mercury would orbit the Sun at 13.6 meters away from it, Venus at about 25 meters, the Earth is 35 meters away from the Sun, Neptune would be 1 kilometer away from the Sun, and the dwarf planet Pluto roughly 1.4 kilometers away. In the end, calling it space is a well way to refer to it because there is lots of space out there. Our world, it seems, is far smaller than we tend to imagine. The age of the universe is estimated at about 13.8 to 14.5 billion years. To visualize this, imagine comprising cosmic history into a three-story building. The entire span of Homo sapiens would occur only at the bottom millimeter. The past 10,000 years from the dawn of agriculture to today would be about 10 micrometers thick. The past century from 1900 up till the present would be around 100 nanometers. That is approximately the size of a human cell. While this view is awe-inspiring, one cannot help but feel that Doctor Strange was correct that this universe stands indifferent to us. All our works, all the accomplishments that humanity has made are basically 100 nanometers on the grand scale of things. A human life of 100 years is 1/1000th of a second in this scale. So, is there any true meaning in this universe? And this is where we are now, safe in this little mirror dimension of us. What I'm about to say is a daring statement, but it is made from this presupposition that we are in this mirror dimension that we can think about this for now. Let us for a moment assume that Doctor Strange is correct. Let us assume that we are momentary specks in time and space. This is easy to show and prove. We just did. And let us assume for a moment that the universe stands indifferent to us. Whether I am here tomorrow or not, the cosmos gives a damn. The sun will continue to shine, the earth will continue to rotate, and for the next 5 billion years, life will go on. Whether humanity is part of this or not is still to be seen. But the point is, let us assume the universe is indifferent to us. Is there still meaning? Can we still find meaning in such a universe? And if so, where do we find this meaning? The MCU, including all its spin-offs, was never created to address existential questions or explore philosophical or psychological themes. These cinematical marvels are products for entertainment purposes, and their continued success, despite the presence of some internet trolls, underscore their value as entertainment. Yet, Doctor Strange provides valuable insight when considering the meaning of life and how one should live. The development of the character is one from a bad, inauthentic existentialist to an authentic existentialist who has experienced angst, worked through it, and is now grounded in an authentic ontological existence. That is, an authentic, meaningful human existence, or at least this is true for the Doctor Strange of the sacred timeline. In the MCU, there are different timelines and different universes where variants of the heroes we know and love exist. In one of them, Captain America, for example, is not a man but a woman, Margaret Elizabeth Peggy Carter, aka Captain Carter. We will turn to the alternate Doctor Strange below. The timeline most commonly known and that followed the first phase of the MCU is known as the Sacred Timeline. This is the one where Doctor Strange becomes an authentic and grounded existentialist living a meaningful human existence. But this is not where his story started. At the beginning of the film, Stephen Strange is a brilliant physician who lives an inauthentic life, a life that Heidegger would have called an ontic life. Someone choosing to live his life ontically, like Strange, will interact with the world as though he is a neutral scientific observer, treating other people, like objects and their illnesses, as no more than intricate problems to be solved. This way of living is evident throughout the first part of the film, where Strange focuses entirely on his job, one he excels at. His view is that his brilliance, his calling, cannot be wasted and on cases that others could just as easily accomplish and finish. He has a unique calling. He has a purpose that only he can respond to. And this is his focus to the exclusion of all else. This might seem initially like a life of meaning. Strange knows his life has meaning and that this is unique to him. He responds to this call. He answers the call of life. He is creative in a sense of medical innovations where his techniques and surgical skills save large amount of life. He seemingly experiences life to the fullest, enjoying parties and the company of other important figures in his attitude, and his attitude is that there is meaning to his life. But all this is in bad faith. It is merely an ontic existence. For Strange plays the role of physician without being a true physician. The work he does is for his own glorification. The cases he solves, as noted, are just that, cases. For Stephen Strange, there is no difference between a living human being and a corpse on which he could work. The beings he operates on are a means to an end. They are there to promote his grandeur. Stephen Strange is not meaningfully and personally involved in his own worldview. All this comes to a crashing end when he is in an accident and loses the ability to use his hands to operate. He spirals down into depression and feels that all meaning in life was taken away, showing the dangers of finding meaning in only one of the tenets of logotherapy without also focusing on the others. Strange did have creative value in his life, but his experiential value was such that he was a stranger in the world. He had no meaningful connections to other humans, and his one friend who showed him compassion and love he alienated by making it clear that human relations can in no way contribute to meaning in life. Only his work, which brought him fame and glory, is what gave Stephen Strange meaning. But as noted, throughout the film, Stephen Strange becomes Doctor Strange, one of Earth's heroes. And by the end, he lived an authentic ontological and not ontic life that is meaningful human existence. Heidegger views an ontological life as one that is inseparable from all that is around it. He notes, in the ontological way of living, instead of merely observing the world as spectators, we choose to become part of it. We throw ourselves into life, caring about others and working to make the world a better place. As the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange has the power to restore his hands so that he can go back to a life of a surgeon, but chooses rather to use his newfound calling to save the whole earth. This he does by sacrificing himself. He places himself in a time loop in the dark dimension with Dormammu. In this loop, Doctor Strange will be killed over and over and over again for all eternity. But because he chose this, he took responsibility for this calling, and he is able to bear the suffering that Dormammu inflicts on him. He knows that even this continuous death that he needs to suffer will lead to a meaningful existence. Stephen Strange's transformation from an ontic to an ontological existence is not thanks to the mystical arts he learned. Rather, it was because of the relationships he formed. He formed a bond with the Ancient One, who became his mentor, the librarian, who became his friend, and even with his love interest and friend, Dr. Palmer, whom he rejected at the start of the film. It is through the combination of these bonds, his creative and attitudinal values, that Strange realizes the true meaning in life. Initially, as an ontic physician, Stephen Strange saw himself as separate from the world. He was there to conquer and subdue it. He was there to subdue and keep death at bay for as long as possible. And because of this view, he felt that all of life is a momentary speck within an indifferent universe. By the end, the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange, knew that all of life is precious. Death is part of life, and that even death can give meaning to life. It is what gives life its meaning that causes you to appreciate each moment. But what if things were different? What if Doctor Strange did not lose his hands, but lost his heart and never recovered it? In the alternative world, the What If installment of Doctor Strange, the narrative is much the same. Stephen Strange still becomes Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange saving Earth from Dormammu, and all seems well. But underneath it all, there is pain, a loss, a guilt that drove this Doctor Strange down a different road. From the start of the What If episode, things are different. Stephen Strange is still a brilliant physician, but what gives his life meaning is not his work alone. Rather, it is his bond with Dr. Christina Palmer that gives meaning to what he does. He is humble. He knows that what he does is amazing, but only because he can share his success with someone he loves. The crash that occurred in the sacred timeline of the movie was his fault. He was driving irresponsibly. In the What If episode, this crash was out of his control. It was not his fault. And when it occurs, Strange did not lose his hands, but rather his heart. His beloved friend and lover, Dr. Palmer, died. In quick succession, we learned that this grief drove him to the mystic arts and he still became Sorcerer Supreme, defeating Dormammu. But this is not where the narrative ends in this world. In this world, Doctor Strange lives in the past. He cannot reconcile and harmonize his past suffering with his present life. Things do not make sense to him. The bond he lost with the death of Dr. Palmer is too great a loss. He changes his attitudinal and creative values. He responds to the call only as Sorcerer Supreme can answer it, but because he could not find a new attachment, see himself as part of the whole of creation, Doctor Strange could not live a life of meaning. Rather, he goes back in time, tries to undo the past, rather than integrate his suffering into his present situation. When this does not work, he starts stealing the power of other beings to increase his own power. His life's purpose as Sorcerer Supreme became a means not to help others, but to aggrandize himself and fulfill his own desires. Now, I am not judging Doctor Strange of the what if world, for as Frankel notes, don't judge another if you have not gone through what they have gone through. In the end, because this Doctor Strange could not reconcile his past and create a harmonious understanding of his present situation, he got trapped in a dimension alone and isolated. What if Doctor Strange does sacrifice himself to save the universe, but he is alone, isolated, and there is no way for him to respond to the calling of life? To conclude, I'm going to try to synthesize all of this, and at a certain point, I will step out of the mirror dimension and share something that I believe is worth considering. Comparing Doctor Strange's development in the sacred timeline with the what if narrative shows the importance of not seeing the tenets of logotherapy in isolation. Just focusing on one of them, regardless of how noble it might be and sound, could lead to an inauthentic, ontic life. A life where we live as false humans, where even though it might seem we are responding to life's calling, we are not living a life of meaning. Doctor Strange only became an authentic, grounded existentialist, living a life of meaning when he realized the importance of being connected to others, with the willingness to sacrifice, suffer, and even, if needed, to die for others. This is what gave meaning to his life. This is where meaning is found, when creative, experiential, and attitudinal values are in harmony and meaning ensues from it. And now to end, I step out of the mirror dimension into our world and will share something deeply personal. Like Doctor Strange, I also want to live an ontological and not an ontic life. I started preparing this presentation with the question, and this whole presentation was driven by this simple yet profound thought. What if Doctor Strange is correct? What if we are momentary specks in an indifferent universe? What if the universe does not care about us? Is there still meaning? Consider the song of birds. However much one enjoys the song of birds, they are not singing for the advancement of music, and the clouds are not floating across the sky to be painted by artists. Streams are not flowing next to a road for thirsty travelers to drink from. And yet, we are welcomed. We are welcome to listen to the songs. We are welcome to look at the clouds and enjoy their travels across the sky. And any traveler that comes across the life-giving stream is able to drink from it freely. I do not believe that this universe cares about us. I do not believe that there is some big deity sitting somewhere concerned about what we do and keeping tally of good and bad. Not that I am denying the existence of God in any way in this sense, but rather proposing a different understanding of God, of meaning, of the calling of life, however one wants to think about this, which will be the topic of a future presentation. But I do not think that somewhere back in the past, 1000, 2000, or even 13.4 billion years ago, the universe determined that we will be sitting right here, right now. It was through our choices, our responses to life, that we have come to this moment. I think Doctor Strange was partly correct. We are momentary specks in an indifferent universe. But it is this realization that gives life its meaning to me. The realization that I am a momentary speck lets me appreciate each moment, each encounter. This is what drives me to tell the people I care for that I care for them. This is what drives me to live each moment fully present, not with the hope of someday inheriting a hinter world and finding meaning there. This moment is what truly is meaningful. The time I am sharing with all of you now, the moments I engage fully in this world is what is meaningful. To paraphrase one of my favorite views of Alan Watts, if there is such a thing as a meaningful life, intelligence, love, or beauty, you find it in an authentic connection with other people. Meaning is not found out there. It is not given in some cold, clinical, and abstract way to any of us. This all exists in human beings. And if they exist in us, it means that meaning, intelligence, love, and beauty are symptomatic of the scheme of things. These things cannot be taken away by suffering, by death, or even the realization that we are momentary specks in an indifferent universe. For these things are, like we are, symptomatic of the universe that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for again a wonderfully fascinating, intriguing, and extremely thought-provoking presentation. Um, I think first of all, there's a whole lot to be discussed about what creativity actually means. And I was interested in the one statement that you made about, you know, Marvel does not, or Disney does not set out to create movies and TV series as philosophical treatises on life, but as uh, providers of entertainment. Now, if entertainment, what was, so how do we define entertainment? What are we entertained by? Surely we have to be entertained by that which we experience as meaningful as humans. And not particularly on a deep level, but we laugh at things, something we find funny. We feel sad when we grieve for a character. So we're actually in the process of engaging with entertainment, we are actually engaging with the stuff of life. And writers um, are constantly in story rooms talking about how do we, Shakespeare was the one who said it, very well. We hold a mirror up to nature. And that's what writers do. We are looking for what is the truths that are contained in the human condition that we can put forward in a palatable, uh, easily digestible form for human beings who don't necessarily will have the drive and commitment to analyzing the meaning of life. But how much does entertainment contribute to our understanding of meaning for us unconsciously? Makes sense.
I know. I think entertainment makes an immense contribution. As you know, say, for me, the movies that are popular and what is deemed as popular culture almost is like a seismograph that sort of is in tune with what people are interested in. And if you look at the development of the Marvel movies, the question I always ask myself is why suddenly did these type of archetypal superhero movies become so popular? Why do people constantly view them and view them over and over? So yeah, I think one needs to pay attention to these entertainment ideas to see what is some of the questions that people are addressing in the world, in literally on ground level and not in some ivory tower in the end. So yeah, I think it's extremely important to take note of what we do find as entertainment.
And are we entertained? Are we more entertained when there is meaning in what we are watching, even though we're not consciously going, there is meaning, but when it resonates within us on the level of some universal truth, or, do we find
Yeah,
that more entertaining?
yeah. Personally, I think this comes down to taste in the end, but I do think we are entertained more by things that resonates with us. And if you look at a good example, the other movie series I'm busy working on in theology is the Godzilla series. Now, the older versions sort of spoke about the angst that people had for nuclear destruction, and the newer reboot version speaks about the angst of ecological destruction again. And people really don't find the older ones as entertaining as the newer ones because the newer versions of Godzilla speaks to that angst and what we are experiencing at this moment. So yes, I think there's certainly something there about we find what we experience as important at this stage in our lives more entertaining than something that doesn't really speak to us in our real lives in the end.
I mean, even if we look at historical dramas and even
Yeah.
dystopian things where which are hypotheses of the future, they
Mm,
still tap into those questions that we are constantly
oh,
wrestling
no,
with
for
as
sure.
humans. Thank you. Very wonderful. I'd like to open it up to the floor. Who's got some questions for Robert or some
I
comments?
see Dr. Kanda's hand is raised.
Dr. Kanda?
Yeah, Robert, thank you very much for very not only entertaining but very challenging presentation. Definitely very challenging presentation. I'm just looking and dreaming that one day I would have an opportunity to have a cup of tea with you here in Vescopi. And you have said quite a number of things which are really thought provoking and important. The one of them I think is the combination. Yeah, you said combination of values. That was so beautiful. Well, sometimes that's where we find ourselves. That you have the creative, the experiential, and the attitudinal value
Mm,
combine themselves in that moment.
mm,
Um, and I love the question. I don't know, Mark, tell me if it's. I'm not saying I understood your question, but I love what you raised there as well. That what is entertainment?
mm,
Now the question is, are entertainers or people who create all these fiction which entertain us, do they have a code of ethics? Do they have to be ethical? This brings me back to the issue of creativity. Mark knows, some of you knows as well, my children are dancing. They are dancers. Do they have do they have to be ethical in their dance? Because I always struggle with that with people who are artistic and is like, no, I'm just entertaining people. But are you entertaining people to any cost, causing any harm? Do you ask yourself what could be the impact of what I produce? Is there a kind of responsibility? That's a question. The second question is, and this is because of where I'm living, where I'm working in. When someone comes with a fictional story, does he or does she has to be aware of the reality that at the end of everything, this is just a story and it's different from the reality. I'm saying that because, as you know, in psychiatry, we have delusions, and we say generally people who have become psychotic with delusions, they've lost that ability to separate, we say it, reality testing. So do they, whoever who creates, does he immerse himself completely in that activity to the extent of losing the sense of reality? Do they have responsibility? And do they also have a sense of beauty? So this brings me actually, because we don't have much time and I'm aware other people should also come up. As much as we combine the three values, I believe as well that we should also be looking at meaning in a sense of meaning always points to what is beautiful, true, and right. And that is very, very important. And having said that, I would like to say as well that Franco went into the concentration camp with a book, with a book in logotherapy. So I would say logotherapy went through the test of the concentration camp because it was already there. That's an important question because what you are also saying is looking at the Dr. Strange story. I'm not a fan. I don't know the story as well. But from what you are saying, the final question is, as much as there is meaning in suffering, can we also say there is meaning in happiness or in joy? When good things happen, is there meaning in that moment? But otherwise, thank you very much. You have just opened up a very, you might not realize that you have opened up a very, very big box of questioning, which very relevant, very important, and I'm very thankful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanda.
Anybody else like to? I'd like to just pick up on what Dr. Kanda was saying about this issue of ethics in art and artistic creation. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought now. So when artists sit around, I know what Dr. Strange is a surgeon, right? Highly creative process to make heal human bodies, to save lives, to turn people who are at death's door around, and that is hugely creative. But my understanding from the way you were telling it is that the satisfaction he achieved from it stopped at the point of taking the other person into account. It was simply his satisfaction in being able to almost perform a miracle, to bring somebody back from death's door. There was no seeing of the patient as another human being. And so if we're looking at creative in the context of creative values, I think we have to look at what the term creative means, because we can be creative and create something, but surely a creative value has to create something which grows, and that growth can only really exist. The fertile ground it needs to grow must be in relation to other human beings. So, what is the point of creating a great work of art if nobody else benefits from it, if you do it just for yourself? What is the point of being a surgeon who saves the life if you are not aware of the gift that you're giving the other human being? And I think that almost a way to test this would be, I have this feeling that when we practice the creative values completely truthfully as they should be, the experiential value is an automatic outcome. In other words, there is no completely altruistic behavior. We can do something for somebody completely anonymously. They may not even know that we have done it. But if we have done it from the basis of how the creative value should work, we are always going to get that feedback of, let's call it the warm and fuzzy feeling in the heart of having done something good for somebody else. So it's for me almost, are we practicing the creative values in the way they need to be practiced in terms of how Frankl views them in relation to finding meaning? And if there's an automatic experiential value that grows out of the practice of that creative value, it almost seems to be like that could be an answer, potentially an answer.
For me, that connectedness is sort of foundational to anything. If you just do something and it's not connected to other people, then I'm like, why do we do it in the end? So yeah, for sure, no. That's why I also ended with that statement of Alan Watts that says that if there is something like beauty in this world, we don't find it only in ourselves, you find it in that connectedness with other people by being connected to one another. So yeah, that connectedness is so important.
Other thing that's really fascinating, and there are many of these points which are raised in it, and then obviously it's about semantics to a large extent, but the word indifference. So indifference is when something outside of ourselves is not cognizant of us or is but doesn't care about us. Um, so like meaning, which is there, but we have to find it. Can we turn indifference around by I'm not quite sure how to put this. By finding meaning, we force the world not to be indifferent to us because we then interpret it as no longer being indifferent.
I think this is exactly where I'm moving to this because in the end, if you say we are living in a indifferent universe, you're saying we are separate from the universe, and yet the universe peoples like an apple tree apples, basically. So if we start to care for one another, if we are not anymore not indifferent, but we care for one another, then we are not living in a indifferent universe anymore because are we not a manifestation of the universe in a sense? So this is actually where all of this is moving
Yeah.
towards in the end of the project. But yeah, that idea. So it's wonderful to see it. It's
Yeah.
actually there in your thoughts and so
Wow.
and
I mean,
that we
there's so
think
many
about.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Dr. Dina would like to say something.
Uh, hmm. Yeah, I would like to follow up on what you just said just now, Mark and Robert. I think it's all a matter of perception. So it needs a transformation actually in us. You talked a lot about moving from ontic to ontological way of being, following Heidegger. But it's all, I think we have to use the word transformation because without the transformation of our perception, we can go on living in a disconnected, unconnected world, an indifferent world. So it's all a matter of our perception of the world. And I know that Frankl talks about the stars, and he says we do not have to go up to look for the stars because the stars are already here. In psychotherapy and existentialism, he says that. And I even want to say that when he talks about the Copernican revolution, he actually talks about changing the question of the meaning of life. But I don't want to relate to it in this sense, but I would like to relate to it in the sense that it was originally used by Kant when he talked about this revolution, wanting to bring the center to man. And what we are talking about meaning now, I would say that we have to go back to a logocentric world universe, a logocentric universe. You talked about geocentric. I would like to put the stress on a logocentric universe. And by that, then we cannot be any more closed beings, like Frankl says in one point, answering Leibniz, he says, we are no monads without windows, because Leibniz said that horrible statement that we are monads, that's little parts, little particles, without windows to one another, that is. So Frankl denies that and negates that. And that is the whole thing about interconnectedness. We are all interconnected, and we are how does Elizabeth Lucas say it? She says we are a meaningful part of a meaningful whole. And this wholeness is wholeness of meaning. This wholeness of being is a wholeness of meaning. It only needs our perception to be changed in ourselves. It needs a transformation, existential transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina.
Sorry, I see we're just about out of time, but Dr. Kanda is wanting to say something else.
No, I wanted just to say, Tida, correct me if I'm wrong when you say the meaning with logos. That's what I personally felt. I'm not a philosopher, but I think there is that expression existentialists have used of being in the world.
Ah, you asked about it in my
Yes,
presentation. I
yeah,
remember.
being in the world. Having been exposed to logotherapy, I've come to a conviction of saying that expression has to be completed with being in the world
With
with
meaning.
meaning.
Yeah. Well,
It
Heidegger,
is-
also Robert, I think you mentioned something like that, being thrown into the world. You said that the thing is that Heidegger talks about ourselves being thrown into the world. That is not in any sense that the universe has no meaning, but in the sense that we find ourselves in the world. We have not chosen it. We find ourselves in the world. But as Robert was saying, on an ontic level, that is on the first level of existence, but we have to be called for a whole journey of transformation to come to the ontological level, which is a higher level, and it's the awareness of our existence and the awareness of the meaning of our being in the world. So it wouldn't mean that the universe has no meaning. It's just that Heidegger wants to be a phenomenologist, and he starts from the everyday life, and we are being thrown into the world. So we find ourselves in the world. But the question is, when are we feeling called to start this journey that Robert was so beautifully talking about, moving in ourselves to a different level of finding meaning and negating that the universe is indifferent actually, but it's all a matter of our perception.
yeah. Thank you very much. So that, if I may say briefly, would then show the brilliance of Frankl. I'm not sure, personally, I don't think I've grasped him completely. Frankl, when he talks of meaning, he has come up with that contexts, three type of meaning. The meaning of the moment, the meaning of life, and the ultimate meaning. So it's important for us, as we are talking meaning, to be thinking as well in those lines that there is a difference. The meaning of life, the meaning of the ultimate meaning and meaning of the moment. That is very, very, very important. But I don't want, I think there are other people would like to
I think
express
Sean was
questions or
putting.
ask. Yes, it would be pity if we don't give an opportunity.
Do
Yeah,
you
that's
want,
why
Sean, did
one
you want
hour,
to
I
say
don't know.
something?
Yeah.
Sean, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Great presentation, very thought-provoking. A difference with science, theology, philosophy, and in the combination of all of those wonderful things, which takes me back to my specific subject of deliberations of how the earth came about and who we are and here we are today, and whether we believe in Charles Darwin or we don't, the origin of the species. And I think that all of that is purely related, not just to human beings, but I think it's related to every living creature on this earth, every molecule that is so important. And in terms of that, in terms of the human being and its system of entertainment and movies, it's all about the dopamine system. And some people have the reward system, and some people have it good and well, and others don't. We have addictions. Why we got superheroes is your question. So why we have superheroes? Because we don't have a superhero in our life, perhaps. And maybe that superhero that we choose is the superhero that we would like to have as our icon. Um, so I think so very important. So in your particular icon or your particular interest, your superhero happens to be Doctor Strange, which is strange. But it's all about each individual being unique, and I think that is what it's all about. So the entertainment, in terms of general comments about ethics and where it should be and shouldn't be, yes, there is a responsibility that has to be taken, but it's up to the individual to accept or not accept. And I think it also comes to the age group of who you're appealing to and who goes. So, for example, Robert, are you on TikTok? I doubt it. So, it's a kind of audience that wants that, and the audience that cries out for it. And I think that in terms of all of this related to logotherapy, is there meaning in what you're watching? Do you get enjoyment? Does your dopamine accelerate? Do you get a dopamine fix? And I think it's all about each individual. And I don't think we're here, like you said, to judge individuals in terms of what they do, what they like or they don't like. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Or every single point that everybody makes opens up another 10 questions. This is what
Indeed.
Robert, I don't know, it feels to me like it's almost criminal to just leave this here and not explore further the many, many questions that your wonderful presentation has raised. And I'm just wondering how we can go about it. I mean, we can all send you individual questions, but I think the beauty of this process is in the discussion and listening to each other and,
Yeah.
trading ideas back and forward. I'm just wondering if we could, how would everybody feel if we took this into a pan? I'm just trying to remember, are we completely scheduled for every session where we got gaps? I know you redid the schedule today.
There's one that's a maybe, so we'll have to see for next month, the beginning of next month.
Okay. Can we have a look at that? And well, Robert, this is dependent on you, I think. How would you feel about revisiting this? And perhaps, I mean, I would really, there's quite a lot of people here listening, which is wonderful, but I would really like to, if you could perhaps not give your complete presentation again, but, a kind of a recap, and then we go back into this discussion and maybe have some people on it. Do you think it would be worth,
Yes, for sure. I'm open to it.
it's really, apart from anything else, it's also opening up a whole new way of talking about logotherapy and analyzing it, which is
Yeah, can I make a suggestion? And
exciting.
why don't we have a Doctor Strange round table? And that Doctor Strange round table just extends it. So yes, you don't have to continue that. Just maybe, Robert, if you want to just give us the theme, the thread, and we can then just have the theme or the thread in the invitation of the Doctor Strange round table, and then it just opens it up again.
That's great. Pan, could we look at just that maybe session, finding out if it's not confirmed, let us actually allocate this what Sean was just suggested in that slot. Robert, if you would be happy with that?
Yes, no, 100% with me.
Okay, wonderful.